So now what we're going to do is prep the wrist strap. Anyone that might have previously bought this pattern, I have actually slightly adapted this pattern shape now for the wrist strap to enable it to be easier to feed the end bit here through the zip pull. So that's the end that goes through the zip pull now. So what we're going to be doing is flipping it over, and we're going to draw a line 1.5 centimetres up from the edge. So these Pattern Masters are wonderful because they've got ½ centimetre increments along here. So I'm putting it on the 1.5 line using a biro because that tends to work really well on all leather colours. And then what we want to do is apply glue all the way along here, and the goal should be that you're aiming to fold over the edge of the leather so it sits in line with where that biro line is. Now you've got two options of glue here. One is the contact adhesive, or you could use Copydex. But what I have found is the contact adhesive works a little bit better because once we've turned this first turn, we're going to double turn it, so turn it again. And really the Copydex glue doesn't particularly like the shiny surface of the leather, whereas the contact adhesive works perfectly, but it is totally up to you. So initially we're going to apply the glue on this lower bit. And you don't want to put glue up any further than where this widest point is. Where it goes narrower, we're not going to have any glue on there at all, please. And then working from the left, I'm picking the edge up and I'm just very delicately placing it up to that line. Try not to stretch or distort the leather at all. I've noticed some people sort of really try and stretch it, but here you're almost just lifting it and placing it. And then give it a good hammer. So what that will do is start to really sort of almost crisply fold it along here. And then we need one more line of glue that's going to sit on the top surface of the leather here, all the way along to this point again. And then we're going to double fold. So we're going to fold again. So you don't want too much glue at this stage at all. Once we've stitched, you're actually going to trim away the excess leather. And it's quite handy not to have too much glue in there, otherwise it gets a bit more tricky for trimming it away. Just enough to hold it whilst we're sewing. So again, I'm working from the left side, and we're trying to make it so that this strap is about 8 mils wide. You don't want it too wide, but you don't want it too narrow either, because ideally we're going to be having like 2 lines of stitching each side. So keep working your way all the way down. And we're sort of using the edge here of where we folded first of all to be the pivoting point of how you're turning it. So it should naturally just feel like you're needing to fold it at that point. And give it a good little hammer. And then you might want to put some quilting clips on in preparation for sewing, but be mindful that the little dots here on the quilting clips, the little grips, sometimes they mark leather, so just be mindful that I tend to put the grip bit where I'll be sewing, so it completely will be disguised. And that's all ready for sewing. So now we're going to be stitching the lovely wrist strap. The goal is to have this dual line of stitching, so a stitch each side. We're wanting to start from this end here, so where we've got the triple turn, we're going to start here on this edge and come all the way down, only going about 1 mil away from the edge, so go super careful. And we're going to mount the machine with the top stitching thread on and then the thinner thread on the bobbin, so you get your lovely detailed stitch. We're then going to pivot at each end here, come across, and then you're coming all the way back down. So it's like a box of stitching all the way round. And then just at the end here, you can do the back and forth, But all of this actually gets hidden a bit later on, because this narrow little bit with the single layer is actually the bit that we feed through the zip pull. So that's the bit that's going to look really nice and pretty, and then the rivet goes on after. So remembering to go down to stitch size 4 now, because we're sewing the strap and that's in the leather. So just to remind you, we've got the top stitching thread on the top, and then we've got the thinner thread on the bobbin, and you just want to give your strap just a little spray with a silicone spray, so that will really help it. Don't worry if it goes darker on this underneath, we're trimming that all away. And obviously we've still got the leather point needle on, so if anyone's changed the needle to sew your lining, then swap it back to the leather needle. So I'm anchoring down first, and I'm just going to manually do a stitch to begin with, just to get it going. Sometimes when you're right on the edge of the leather, it is a bit tough to get going. And then I'm going to do one stitch back. So literally just one single back tack, and then just off you go. And we're going as close to that edge as possible, please. And we have got 3 layers of leather now, so it's going to be a little bit more challenging for the machine. If any of you are finding it struggling a bit, then I recommend just putting your finger just on the front of your foot, and that should really help the machine not skip any stitches. So now I'm at the end where the single layer of leather is. So you're going to come all the way up, pivot so that it's equidistant from the edge, probably just one stitch across, pivot back round, and just be mindful as you go from the single layer to the triple layer of leather. And then as you get to the end here, you pivot round and just do one final stitch forward, then one back. So you just got, again, a single back tack, but all of this area here is going to be hidden. So don't worry if they don't even quite join, it'll all be hidden. The next stage is trimming away this excess of leather. From where we've top stitched here, we're now going to trim that away. So I find it best to turn it to its back, using some little scissors. Now you want to try and get as close to that stitching as possible, because ideally when we cut this off, we don't want to see the raw edge at all. You want to have your lovely turned edge. But what you don't want to do is open your scissor up too much to jeopardize possibly cutting through your lovely turned edge. So use like the top sort of 1 centimetre or so of your sharp scissors. And I actually sort of angle the blade, so you're almost going in at a 45-degree angle so that you can really get it as close as possible. If you get the angling really right, you can actually almost do this thing where you tear the leather. So you're kind of pulling on the excess, not even opening the scissor up. I'm literally just pulling both of the strap and the extra. But it is quite a fiddly technique, so just take your time. The most important thing is you trim off as much as you can, but without cutting the strap on the other side. And this is where I was saying earlier, it's quite good to not have too much glue under there, because if it's really, really well glued, then you can't kind of get the scissor blade under. So almost there. So that's really lovely. From that side, you cannot see that raw edge at all. But what's quite nice now is just to give it a little bit of the tragacanth gum. So dip your finger in. Again, this is from the reverse side. I'm just going to be concentrating on that raw edge that we just cut. And you're almost using sort of like your fingernail to lift up the fibres and then just push them back down. So it just really neatens off that edge. And you're going to go all the way along doing that. Just gives that raw edge a really lovely finished feel. And any of the excess tragacanth gum you can always rub off with cloth or just rub it off with your fingers. And then I definitely recommend on this end where you've got the single layer, just go round with your finger. So now comes the really fun final bit of actually bringing all of the strap, the tassel and the bag all together. So we're just going to mark some reference points from the wrist strap pattern. So I want you to place the pattern back on, and where we've got these points here, this is going to be the points for the rivets. So you want to be really careful when you're cutting these out because you don't want to cut through your lovely stitching. So we've got one right at the end, one here where it goes to where the wider part was, but that's basically where the triple layer is now. And then one right at the end as well. Now I quite like using the rotating hole punch at this stage, but you could use the individual hole punches, and we're doing the hole for the size stem that you're using. So what you want to do is measure the width of the stem here, and that will relate to the hole that you need. So we've got a 2.5 mil hole that we're creating for our ones. So hole punch all of those out, make sure they're definitely out the way. If anyone needs to just get the awl just to push the remaining little excess of the leather out the way, then do. And then what we've got here is a 9mm cap, and it's a double headed rivet. So you've got the nice cap on each side. So we've got the long stem on this one, and then this one is the cap. And you're basically going to be feeding it all through all the layers. So you want to grab your lovely bag with the zip closed. First of all, you take the strap so that you've got this excess with the suede side facing you, and you're going to feed on your tassel. So that's the first thing. And then this feeds onto the zip pull. So pop it on like that. And then you're going to get the end of the strap to fold on top of this hole right here. And then in the end, the single layer one goes on top. But what I'd recommend first is grabbing the stem, bringing it through all those layers. And this is why it's quite good to use a 9mm stem here, because you've got quite a few layers of the leather. So you just want to make sure you can just see the stem as it comes through that hole. Pop the cap on top. And then what we're going to be doing is closing that off. Now this is a hand tool for closing them off. So ideally you want to have one of those, or if any of you have actually got like the rivet press, then that's absolutely brilliant. So pop that on here, and this is the cap side. So you're always pressing down from the cap side. So hold the tool really vertically going down to the table with a nice solid base underneath, whether that's your table or you've got a metal plate. And then with the hammer, we're going to hammer it flat. And you want it to go as nice and compressed as possible, so that means it's totally closed off. You can check it with your nail. And then if you're really satisfied, then that is your beautiful bag all finished.